The snowstorm roared across the mountains, covering everything in white silence. The human man struggled forward, his breath heavy, his beard full of frost. He had come here looking for peace after years of war, but peace never lasted long for him. His boots sank deep into the snow as he pushed through the freezing wind. Then he heard it. A faint cry, so weak it almost disappeared with the storm. He stopped, his heart racing, and turned his head to listen again. The sound was not the wind. It was a voice, thin and desperate. He gripped his pack and moved toward it, not knowing that this step would change his life forever. Through the wall of snow, he saw two shapes lying close together. At first he thought they were bodies frozen long ago, but as he knelt he saw pale eyes open weakly, glowing like crystals under the storm. Two young alien sisters lay on the ground, their white hair tangled with frost, their thin arms trembling as they tried to move. They were not human, yet something about them looked painfully fragile. He pulled one close, feeling the cold burning from her skin. The other tried to speak, but her lips shook too much. He knew if he left them, they would die within minutes. The man who once swore never to fight again now faced a new battle, against the storm itself. He wrapped them in his thick coat, one on each side, and tried to lift them. Their bodies were too cold, too light, as if the snow had already claimed them. He clenched his teeth and carried them step by step through the howling blizzard. Every breath cut his lungs like knives, but he refused to stop. The aliens whispered in a language he did not know, their voices weak but soft, like broken music. He kept moving, driven by something he could not explain. Saving them felt heavier than any war he had fought, yet he could not abandon them. By the time he reached the cliffs, his legs were shaking. He found a small cave, dark and half covered in ice. It was enough to shield them from the wind. He laid the sisters on the ground and quickly built a fire with the little wood he had. The flames grew slowly, their light casting gold on the stone walls. The warmth spread, and the sisters opened their eyes wider. Their skin looked pale as moonlight, their faces breathtaking even in weakness. They stared at him with both fear and trust, as if unsure if this stranger was their savior or their doom. The man offered them water from his flask. One of the sisters reached with trembling hands, her fingers long and delicate, her nails shimmering, faintly. She drank with shaking lips, her eyes locked on his as if memorizing him. The other whispered something again, her voice low but sharp, and he noticed the way her eyes burned like ice blue fire. They were sisters, but different. One gentle, the other fierce, yet both were beautiful in a way that felt unreal. He did not understand why, but he felt a weight pressing on him, as if their survival now bound his fate to theirs. The fire grew stronger, and their breathing steadied. The man leaned back against the cave wall, exhausted. He thought about the wars he had left behind, about the men and women he had failed to save. He had promised himself never to carry that burden again. Yet here he was, carrying two fragile lives on his shoulders, refusing to let them die. The storm outside howled like a beast, but inside the cave he felt a strange silence. The sisters huddled close to the flames, their glowing eyes still watching him. He did not know their world, their story, or why they were here in the frozen mountains. All he knew was that he had found them and nothing would be the same again. The man closed his eyes for a moment, listening to their soft breathing. His muscles ached, his chest burned, but deep inside something stirred. He thought he had left behind every reason to fight, yet these two alien sisters had pulled him into a new battle. Not of guns, not of soldiers, but of survival and trust. And in that cave, with the storm raging outside, he understood one thing. Clearly, destiny was not finished with him yet. The storm lasted all night. Snow piled at the cave's mouth until the world outside disappeared under white silence. The man kept feeding the fire with every scrap of wood he had. When it burned low, he tore straps from his own pack to keep the flames alive. Without the fire, the sisters would not survive the cold. He watched them closely, seeing life slowly return to their faces. Their lips no longer looked blue, and their trembling eased. Yet their glowing eyes never left him, as though he was the only thing keeping them tethered to the world. When dawn came, a pale light touched the mountains. The man finally felt his own body weakening. He leaned back, drifting close to sleep. Then a soft hand touched his arm. He opened his eyes to see the gentler sister kneeling beside him. Her skin, though still pale, had regained warmth. She tilted her head, studying him like one might study a creature from a story. Her lips moved, forming words in her alien tongue. Though he could not understand, he felt the meaning in her tone. It was thanks. She pressed her hand to his chest, where his heart beat strong beneath the layers of fabric, then smiled faintly. The other sister, fiercer and sharper, pulled her away. She spoke quickly, her voice harder, her eyes narrowing at the human. He did not need translation to feel her suspicion. She was beautiful in a colder way, her silver hair falling over her face like strands of ice. She looked at him as though she wanted to test him, to see if he was worthy or dangerous. For a long moment, silence stretched between them. Then she wrapped an arm around her sister and pulled her back toward the fire, never letting go of her wary stare. The man sighed and shook his head. He had seen such suspicion before, in the eyes of people torn by war. Trust was not given easily and sometimes never at all. He did not blame her, yet he felt a weight pressing in his chest. He had not saved them for reward, but still their gaze made him restless. He gathered his strength and stood, moving to the cave's entrance. The storm had weakened, though snow still fell lightly. He studied the horizon. There was no sign of life, no smoke, no villages. Whoever these sisters were, they were far from home. As the day passed, he melted snow for water and rationed the last of his food. The sisters accepted what he gave without resistance, though the fierce one always took hers after her sister had eaten. They watched him closely, every movement, every breath. Sometimes their eyes met his and he felt something stir deep inside, something dangerous and unfamiliar. They were alien, yet more striking than any women he had ever seen. Their features seemed carved from ice and light, both fragile and powerful. He reminded himself to stay cautious. Desire had no place here, not in the cold where death waited at every turn. By nightfall, the gentler sister tried to speak again. She pressed her hand to her chest and said a single word, slow and clear. Lyra. Then she pointed to herself. The man nodded, repeating softly, Lyra. Her smile brightened, a small spark in the cave's darkness. She then gestured to her sister, who frowned but did not resist. Kaelin, she said firmly. The man repeated, Kaelin. The names hung in the air, binding them closer than before. He placed a hand on his chest. Daniel, he said simply. Both sisters repeated it, their voices soft but sure, like they were sealing something sacred. From that moment, the silence between them began to change. Lyra would sit close to him, sometimes leaning gently against his side, her eyes glowing warmly in the firelight. Kaelin, however, would keep her distance, though she never stopped watching. At times she would whisper harsh words to her sister, but Lyra only shook her head. It was as though one sought his trust while the other fought against it. The man knew this fragile balance could not last, yet he said nothing. He only kept the fire alive, fed them water, and carried the weight of their survival on his shoulders. That night, as he tried to rest, he felt Lyra shift closer. Her head touched his shoulder, her breath soft against his neck. His heart thudded in his chest, louder than the wind outside. Kaelin's sharp eyes caught the moment, and she stiffened. She turned away, curling near the fire with her back to them. Yet he could still feel her anger hanging heavy in the air, like another storm waiting to break. The man closed his eyes, but sleep did not come easily. Between the trust of one sister and the suspicion of the other, he felt the beginnings of a conflict he did not yet understand. And in that frozen cave, with the world locked in snow, he realized the true battle had only just begun. The storm finally broke on the third day. The cave opened to a quiet world of white, the sky pale blue, the wind soft instead of sharp. Daniel stood at the entrance, his breath fogging in the cold air, scanning the horizon. The mountains stretched, far in every direction, heavy with snow and silence. If help existed, it was far away. He knew they could not stay in the cave much longer. Food was almost gone, and the firewood was nothing but ash. Survival meant moving forward, even if the unknown waited ahead. Behind him, the sisters stirred. Lyra approached first, her hair shining like silver threads under the morning light. She smiled faintly, clutching his sleeve, her glowing eyes soft with trust. Kaelin followed slowly, her steps careful, her gaze sharp as always. She did not smile. Instead, she crossed her arms, standing between him and her sister as though guarding her from something unseen. Daniel met her eyes, steady and calm. He did not speak their language, yet something unspoken passed between them. She did not trust him, but she knew they needed him. He motioned for them to follow, pointing to the mountains beyond. His gesture was simple. Move forward, survive together. Lyra nodded eagerly, but Kaelin tilted her head, frowning. Still, when he started walking, both followed. Their footprints trailed behind them, quickly filled by drifting snow. Hours passed as they climbed icy ridges, the cold biting at their faces. Lyra stumbled more than once, but Daniel caught her each time, lifting her back to her feet. She looked at him with gratitude, her lips parting as though to say words he could not hear. Each glance lingered too long, too warm for the frozen world around them. Kaelin noticed. Her jaw tightened, her eyes narrowing as she walked ahead, her posture stiff. Once she looked back and saw Lyra's hand resting on Daniel's arm for balance. Her expression hardened, and she pushed forward faster, as though distance could erase what she saw. Daniel sighed quietly. He did not want to come between them, but he could feel the fragile thread tightening. Two sisters, bound by blood, yet now divided by the smallest sparks of affection. He had seen men kill for less, back in the wars he tried to forget. By dusk, they found shelter in the ruins of an old outpost half buried in snow. Metal beams jutted from the ice like broken bones. Inside, the wind whistled through cracks, but it was better than nothing. Daniel cleared a space, lighting a small fire from frozen scraps. Lyra sat beside him, close enough that her shoulder touched his. She offered him a piece of dried root she had carried, placing it in his palm with a smile. He accepted, chewing the bitter taste without complaint. Her kindness was simple but powerful. She looked at him not as a stranger, but as if fate had sent him. Kaelin stayed near the entrance, her arms folded. She watched them, her face unreadable in the firelight. When Daniel looked at her, she turned away sharply, her silver hair falling across her face. Lyra reached for his hand, whispering something soft, almost like a song. Her voice carried warmth, and though he could not understand the words, he felt the meaning. Comfort, hope, perhaps even more. His chest tightened. He had saved them from death, but now they were saving him from the loneliness he had carried for years. Their presence reminded him of what it meant to feel alive. Later, when night wrapped the outpost in silence, Kaelin moved closer. She crouched across from him, her eyes glowing sharply in the dark. For the first time, she spoke slowly, choosing words carefully. "Why? Help us?" she asked, her accent heavy but clear enough. Daniel blinked, surprised she knew some of his language. He answered simply, his voice low, "Because you were dying." She frowned, studying him as if weighing the truth. Then her gaze shifted to Lyra, sleeping against his side, her head resting on his shoulder. Kaelin's lips pressed tight and she whispered, "She trusts too fast." Her tone was half warning, half jealousy. Daniel met her eyes steadily. "And you?" he asked. Kaelin's stare burned, her breath quick in the cold air. For a moment, she seemed ready to speak more, but she turned away instead. She stood, pulling her cloak tighter around her body, and returned to the entrance. Yet her words lingered between them, heavy as the snow outside. She was not just suspicious of him. She was fighting something inside herself, something she refused to name. Sleep came uneasily that night, Lyra clung to Daniel's side, her warmth soft against him. Kaelin kept watch at the door, her silhouette outlined by moonlight. When Daniel's eyes drifted shut, he felt torn between their presence, the gentleness of one and the fire of the other. He had saved two sisters from the storm, but now he carried a storm within himself. And as the night stretched long and silent, he wondered which battle would be harder, the fight for survival or the one for their hearts. The next morning began with silence too deep to trust. Snow had stopped falling and the sky glowed faintly gold as the sun rose over the mountains. Daniel stepped outside the ruined outpost, his boots crunching the frozen ground. His breath hung in the air as he scanned the white horizon. Something in the stillness unsettled him. The storm had hidden them, but now the clear skies might reveal them to others. He knew they were not alone in this land. War had left its marks on every corner of the galaxy, and soldiers or hunters could appear anywhere. Inside, Lyra woke with a soft murmur. She stretched her thin arms, her silver hair catching the fire's light. When she saw him outside, she quickly ran to his side. Her hand slid into his without hesitation, her eyes glowing with warmth. Daniel froze at her touch. She looked up at him with a trust that pierced through his guarded heart. He had saved lives before, but none had clung to him like this. For a brief moment, the snow around them felt less cold, the silence less heavy. Yet behind them, Kaelin stood in the doorway, her sharp eyes narrowing at the sight. Her lips pressed into a hard line as she watched her sister lean against him. Daniel pulled his hand back gently, not wanting to fuel the tension. "We move," he said simply, motioning to the distant ridge. Lyra nodded, eager to follow, but Kaelin stepped forward and placed herself between them. She spoke quickly in their language, her voice low and hard. Lyra's smile faded, her shoulders slumping, but she still glanced back at Daniel with stubborn affection. Kaelin's jaw tightened. For her, this journey was not only survival. It was also a battle to keep her sister safe from the human or perhaps safe from herself. They traveled all day across frozen valleys. Wind whipped their faces and the ground cracked under the weight of their steps. Daniel led, carrying the heaviest load, while Lyra stayed close, her movements lighter, her eyes always on him. Kaelin stayed behind, silent but watchful, her bow, of alien make, slung across her back. She moved like a shadow, her gaze sweeping the ridges for danger. Unlike her sister, she did not allow herself to soften. Yet every time Daniel reached to help Lyra across a sharp slope, Kaelin's fists clenched tight, though she said nothing. By dusk, they reached a frozen forest, the trees twisted and heavy with ice. Strange sounds echoed in the distance. Low growls and the crunch of something large moving between the trunks. Daniel stopped, raising a hand for silence. Lyra froze, her eyes wide, while Kaelin slowly drew her bow. From the shadows, glowing eyes appeared, circling them. Shapes emerged, crouched low and powerful, snow beasts, their fur white as the ground, their fangs long and dripping with frost. They had been drawn by the scent of weakness, the trail of strangers crossing their hunting ground. The largest beast leapt forward, snarling. Daniel reacted instantly, pulling his knife from his belt. He pushed Lyra behind him and faced the monster head-on. The blade flashed, cutting across the beast's hide, but its weight slammed into him, knocking him into the snow. Its jaws snapped inches from his face, hot breath steaming in the freezing air. With a roar, he shoved the knife upward, sinking it deep into the creature's throat. Blood darkened the snow and the beast collapsed. Lyra screamed his name, rushing toward him, but Kaelin's sharp command stopped her. More beasts closed in. Kaelin's bow sang. Arrows of strange crystal. Light shot through the air, striking one beast in the eye, another in the chest. She moved with deadly grace, her body steady, her expression fierce. Daniel rose to his feet, knife dripping as the last two beasts circled. Together, human and alien fought, steel and crystal cutting through fur and bone. When the final beast fell, silence returned to the forest. Their breaths came fast, clouds rising in the cold air, but none had fallen. The ground around them was stained with red, the snow broken by bodies of predators who thought them prey. Lyra ran to Daniel, throwing her arms around him. Her eyes shone like stars, her voice trembling as she whispered his name again and again. Daniel's chest heaved, but he held her gently, feeling her warmth against him. Kaylin stood a few steps away, bow still raised, her breath sharp. She watched the embrace with a look that was not only anger but something deeper. A storm inside her she refused to admit. For her, the battle had not ended with the beasts. It had only shifted inward. That night, they camped among the frozen trees. Daniel cleaned his knife, the blood staining his hands. Lyra sat beside him, brushing snow from his hair, her face glowing with devotion. She spoke softly, as though her words could soothe his weariness. Kaylin kept her distance, tending to the fire, yet every few moments her eyes flicked toward them, her jaw tight, her fingers gripping her bow too hard. She wanted to speak, to demand something, but silence chained her tongue. The fire crackled between them, warm yet sharp, like the space, dividing three hearts caught in a storm greater than snow. The frozen forest seemed calm after the beasts were slain, but Daniel knew danger never ended so easily. Blood on snow was a signal to all who wandered these lands. Something else would come, drawn by the scent of death. He did not sleep deeply that night. Every creak of the trees, every shift of the wind pulled him awake. His knife never left his hand, even when his eyes closed. Beside him, Lyra slept against his shoulder, her breathing steady, her fingers lightly gripping his sleeve, as if afraid he would vanish if she let go. Across the fire, Kaylin sat with her bow, awake and silent, her glowing eyes fixed on him in the dark. When dawn arrived, the forest was too quiet. Daniel packed quickly, urging the sisters to move faster. They traveled north, their footsteps muffled by thick snow. Hours passed, and just as he thought the silence might last, faint shapes appeared on the ridges above. Soldiers. Their armor was dark, their weapons gleaming with alien light. Daniel's stomach tightened. He knew the look of trained fighters, no matter the species. The way they moved, careful, sharp, deadly, told him enough. They were hunting, and they had already seen them. Lyra gasped softly, clutching his arm. Kaylin's face hardened, her hand moving to her bow. Daniel pulled them both down behind an icy boulder. He counted quickly. 6 soldiers, maybe more, hidden. Too many to face head-on, not with only a knife and Kaylin's arrows. His heart pounded. The sisters were weak still, not ready for another fight. They would die if he chose wrong. He closed his eyes, forcing himself to breathe steady. This was not the battlefield of old, but the instincts were the same. Survival meant thinking faster than the enemy. He whispered sharply, "Stay low." They didn't understand every word, but his tone was clear enough. Kaylin nodded once, pulling her sister close. Daniel studied the slope, the trees, the snow. He spotted a narrow path leading between 2 cliffs. Risky, but it offered cover. He gestured toward it, motioning for them to follow. They moved quickly, crouched low, every step careful. The sound of soldiers grew closer, boots crunching, voices murmuring in a language even he didn't know. The hair on the back of his neck rose. He had been hunted before, but this felt worse. This time he carried more than his own life. As they slipped between the cliffs, a voice shouted behind them. A beam of light struck the snow inches from Lyra's, feet sizzling like fire. She cried out, stumbling, and Daniel grabbed her, pulling her forward. Kaylin turned, firing an arrow that burst into crystal shards against a soldier's chest. The man fell, but others advanced. Energy bolts lit the cliffs, throwing sparks as they struck stone. Daniel ran, pulling the sisters with him, heart hammering. He had no rifle, no grenades, no squad at his back. Only his knife, Kaylin's bow, and his will to protect. They broke from the cliffs into a hollow, where frozen water glimmered under faint sunlight. Daniel stopped, breathing hard. They could not keep running. The soldiers were trained, and they would not stop until their prey was dead. He looked at the sisters, Lyra trembling, clutching his arm with tearful eyes, Kaylin glaring fiercely, her bow glowing with energy. For a moment time felt heavy, the weight of choice pressing on him. He had promised himself no more wars, no more killing. Yet here he was again, standing between death and two fragile lives. He clenched his teeth. "No running," he muttered. "We fight." Kaylin's eyes locked on his. For the first time, she looked at him not with suspicion, but with fire that matched his own. She nodded once, sharp and certain. Lyra gasped, shaking her head, speaking quickly in her soft voice. She begged them to move, to keep fleeing, but Daniel placed a hand gently on her cheek, meeting her glowing eyes. "Trust me," he said. She did not understand the words, but the strength in his gaze silenced her. She lowered her head. Tears, glistening, but clung to his sleeve as though his presence was all she needed to believe. The soldiers came, 6 shadows against the snow, weapons raised. Daniel moved first. He leapt forward, knife flashing. The first soldier swung a blade of energy, but Daniel ducked under, driving steel into the gap of armor. Blood sprayed hot against the snow. He twisted, pulling the weapon free, then shoved the falling body into another attacker. Kaylin's arrows split the air, glowing shards piercing armor and dropping enemies one by one. The hollow echoed with the clash of steel and crystal, the screams of dying men, and the roar of a human who refused to fall. When the last soldier collapsed, silence returned. Daniel stood covered in blood and frost, chest heaving, knife dripping red. Kaylin lowered her bow, her face unreadable. For the first time, she did not look at him with suspicion, but with something else, respect, and something darker hiding beneath. Lyra rushed to him, tears streaming, throwing her arms around him. She pressed her face against his chest, whispering his name like a prayer. He held her tightly, but his eyes lifted to Kaylin, who still stood apart, her bow gripped hard in her hand. She stared at him, her glowing eyes sharp, but now mixed with emotion she could not hide. Between them, in the silence after bloodshed, the real battle was clear. The fight outside was done, but the storm between two sisters had only begun. The snow fell again that night, soft and quiet, covering the blood of soldiers until the forest looked untouched. Daniel sat by the fire, his knife resting on the ground beside him. His muscles ached, his breath came heavy, but his mind was louder than his body. Across the flames, Kaylin sat with her bow on her lap, her eyes fixed on him. Not cold now, not hostile, but steady. Lyra leaned against his side, her head resting on his shoulder, her hand curled into his sleeve. She had not let go of him since the battle. For her, he was safety itself. For Kaylin, he was something else. A question she had no answer for. Silence stretched long. Lyra closed her eyes, drifting into sleep against him, her breath soft and warm. Daniel shifted slightly, glancing at Kaylin. She did not look away this time. Instead, she leaned forward, her glowing eyes sharp in the firelight. "Human," she said slowly, her voice steady. "You, not weak." Her words were broken, but her meaning was clear. Daniel nodded once. He was not proud of the blood on his hands, but he knew weakness had no place in this world. Kaylin's lips pressed into a line, her gaze flicking to her sleeping sister. "She loves you," she whispered. The words hung in the cold air. Heavy and sharp, Daniel's chest tightened. He looked down at Lyra's peaceful face, then back at Kaylin. There was no mistaking her meaning. Lyra's heart was open, clear as the fire's glow. But Kaylin's eyes told a different story. She fought against something inside her, against the same pull her sister had surrendered to. Daniel shook his head, voice low. "I didn't ask for this." Kaylin's expression hardened, but only for a moment. Then her eyes softened and she whispered, "But it is here." The days that followed were quieter, but the tension did not fade. Every step they took deeper into the mountains, every night they huddled around the fire, the invisible line between them grew sharper. Lyra clung to him openly, her kindness gentle and steady, Kaylin spoke little, but her eyes lingered when she thought he would not notice. Daniel felt the weight of both hearts pressing against him. He had once carried a rifle heavier than his own body, yet this burden felt greater. It was not death he feared now, but choice. For the first time in years, the future frightened him. On the 6th day, they reached the edge of the mountains. Below stretched a valley where smoke rose from distant villages. Civilization, safety. For the sisters, it meant hope. For Daniel, it meant the end of the strange, fragile world they had built together. Lyra laughed softly, pointing at the smoke, her joy shining brighter than the snow. She threw her arms around him, whispering his name again and again, her glowing eyes wet with tears. Kaylin stood apart, silent, her face hidden by her silver hair. When Daniel's gaze found her, she finally spoke. "When we reach them," she said, "you choose." The words struck like a blade. He wanted to deny it, to refuse the weight, but he saw the truth in her eyes. This was no longer only about survival, it was about them. Two sisters bound by blood yet divided by him. They both wanted his heart, though in different ways. Lyra's love was open and soft, Kaylin's hidden and burning. He had not asked for either, yet both stood before him, waiting. That night, their last in the wild, the fire burned low. Lyra rested against him as always, whispering softly in her alien tongue. He did not understand the words, but he understood the feeling. Love, simple and pure. When she finally fell asleep, Kaylin moved closer, her steps silent. She crouched across from him, her eyes steady. "She dreams of you," Kaylin said. "But I fight." Her hands trembled slightly as she gripped her bow. She lowered her gaze, whispering, "I should hate you, but I cannot." Daniel's heart pounded. He looked between them, one sleeping, one awake, both tied to him. He thought of the battles he had fought, the soldiers he had lost, the promises he had broken. This, he realized, was the hardest war of all. He reached for Kaylin's hand. For the first time, she did not pull away. Her fingers tightened around his, trembling but strong. Their eyes met and no words were needed. She loved him too, though her pride would never admit it fully. The silence between them said enough. At dawn, they left the forest. The valley below opened wide, a new life waiting. Villagers would take them in, give them food, give them safety. But as they walked, Daniel felt both sisters at his side. Lyra holding his arm with open joy, Kaylin walking close with quiet fire in her eyes. He knew the choice would never be simple. Perhaps he would never truly choose, for his heart had room for both. Perhaps fate had bound them together not for division but for unity. As the sun rose over the snow, warming the world at last, Daniel understood one truth. He had not just saved two sisters from the storm. They had saved him from the storm inside, his soul. And whatever waited in the valley below, he would face it not as a man alone, but as the one who carried the hearts of two alien sisters through the snow and gave them reason to live again.